There's a saying that floats around the wealthy towns of Connecticut: money doesn't change people, it unmasks them. And inside the marble gates of the Collins estate, that truth had a heartbeat. Each spring, the Collins family held their legacy luncheon, an event meant to celebrate lineage. But everyone in Maple Glen knew it was really a parade of pride. The table stretched 40 feet beneath chandeliers, imported from Vienna. The crystal clinked, the laughter was rehearsed, and the hierarchy was understood before the first toast was raised. At the far end of that table sat Kinsley Collins, 29 years old, quiet, and never quite fitting into the glossy family portrait. Her dress wasn't new, it was neatly pressed. Her shoes weren't designer, they were polished with care, and her smile, earnest, fragile, was the kind that made people polite for a moment before turning away. Her cousins Whitney, Julietta, and Celine Barr, daughters of the late patriarch's eldest son, treated her as a pleasant inconvenience. Their laughter often found her, wrapped in compliments that bent like knives. "Oh, Kinsley," Whitney said that afternoon, running her manicured fingers along her champagne glass. "I adore how you're not afraid of repeating outfits. It's so sustainable." Kinsley smiled, pretending it didn't sting. "Some things are worth repeating," she said softly. The conversation moved on, faster than mercy. At the head of the table sat Edgar Collins, the family patriarch, an 81-year-old man, with more history in his eyes than years in his bones. His fortune had built schools, banks, and a hospital wing in his name. Yet as his health declined, the vultures had started circling. To outsiders, the Collins family looked impeccable, refined, philanthropic, old money in modern packaging. Inside, it was envy dressed as tradition. Every cousin secretly tallied their worth in comparison to the others. Every smile hid a calculation. And everyone, assumed Kinsley would inherit nothing more than polite applause at the reading of Edgar's will. She wasn't married, didn't own a company, and lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a bakery in Hartford. She worked as a junior accounts clerk at Westridge Financial, earning just enough to stay afloat. But she visited Edgar every week, sometimes to read to him, sometimes just to sit quietly while he dozed by the fireplace. He used to call her the one who listens. That afternoon, as the luncheon plates cleared and champagne gave way to speeches, Edgar struggled to his feet. His hand trembled, but his voice cut through the chatter like glass. "I've lived long enough," he said, "to see charm mistaken for character, and polish mistaken for worth." The laughter dimmed. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the table. "When I'm gone, this family will have to decide whether it values appearances or legacy." A silence followed, sharp and uneasy. Then, forcing a grin, Liam Barr raised his glass. "To legacy," he said. The others followed, awkwardly. Tinsley noticed Edgar's eyes lingering on her longer than anyone else's. There was a sadness in them, and something else, a knowing. That evening after the guests left, she found him in his study, staring at an open journal beside a half-empty glass of water. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old ink. "Grandfather," she whispered. He looked up, tired but smiling. "You see everything, don't you, Kinsley? I just try to help." "You do more than that," he murmured. "And when the noise gets loud, people like you are the only ones who still hear what matters." Before she could reply, he coughed, deep and ragged. The sound echoed off the bookshelves, breaking something invisible. By dawn, Edgar Collins was gone. The news spread like wildfire through the estate. The Barr sisters cried on camera for the family's social feed. Liam called the lawyers before breakfast. Julietta ordered black silk dresses for the memorial, whispering about optics. Tinsley didn't speak. She drove alone to St. Brenton's Chapel, where the candles still flickered from last night's vigil. She lit one for him, her hands trembling, and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." That night, when the rain began, she stood outside the Collins gates, watching the lights in the windows flicker like a storm of greed gathering strength. Somewhere inside that house, plans were already being drawn: who gets what, who takes which company, who inherits the control that Edgar once held steady. Tinsley turned away, soaked and silent, unaware that the man she'd lost had left her something more dangerous than money. He had left her authority, the kind that exposes people for who they really are. The kind that makes a lifetime of humiliation worth enduring. And when the truth surfaced, every polished smile in that family would have to bow to the same sentence written in Edgar's final hand: executor of everything, including their pride. 2 weeks after the funeral, The Collins mansion was no longer a house of mourning. It was a battlefield of whispers. The chandelier light was too bright, the perfume too sweet, and the condolences too rehearsed. The walls seemed to hum with tension. Liam Barr, Edgar's oldest grandson, had turned the study into a command post. Files, wine glasses, and speculative greed filled the air. Julietta, Whitney, and Celine crowded the sofa, scrolling through emails from realtors and financial advisors. They were already dividing what wasn't theirs yet. Edgar left the West Vineyard to the trust, Liam said. His tie loosened. The holding company alone is worth over $800 million. Once the will's executed, we just need signatures to unlock dividends. Signatures? Julietta scoffed. From who? Grandfather wouldn't trust outsiders with Collins' assets. Kinsley, standing at the door with a tray of tea she'd brought from the kitchen, hesitated. She wasn't there to serve, but old habits die quietly. Whitney turned, her tone sharp. You can just set that down, Kins, we'll handle the rest. The tray rattled slightly in Kinsley's hands, the porcelain clinking against silver. She nodded and placed it down carefully on the table. From the corner, Orlando Gray, the family's estate attorney, cleared his throat. The will is sealed until all parties are present, he said. Your grandfather left instructions for an exact reading date, Friday, March 17th at 10 a.m. in this very room. Liam frowned. Why wait 2 more days? Orlando didn't answer directly. Because Edgar Collins liked precision, he said, and I quote, time reveals character better than words. That night, when everyone else had gone, Kinsley lingered near the library hall. She could hear low voices through the half-closed door, Orlando's and the head maid's. She deserves to know, the maid whispered. Not yet, Orlando replied quietly. It'll mean more if it finds her on its own. Kinsley stepped back, pulse quickening. What deserves to find me? In the following days, she wandered through the house helping where she could, packing donations for Edgar's memorial fund, labeling files in the office. She noticed that no one else offered to handle the paperwork. They didn't know where the archives were, didn't even know the passcodes to the safes Edgar had used. But she did. She had spent years helping him organize those very ledgers, hours of unpaid, unseen labor, done in silence while the others laughed on the terrace. On Wednesday, while gathering storage boxes, she opened a drawer and found a sealed envelope marked in Edgar's handwriting. For Orlando's reading, Executor clause. Her heart caught. She didn't open it, she couldn't, but her hands trembled with curiosity and fear. She placed it back exactly where she found it, unaware that the act itself was already written into fate. That night, at her apartment in Hartford, Kinsley sat at her small desk surrounded by unpaid bills and a half-eaten salad. She looked at the framed photo of Edgar on the shelf, his wrinkled smile and steady eyes. He had always said, humility isn't weakness, Kinsley, it's quiet strength. She exhaled slowly, unaware of how that line would soon echo across a marble floor. Friday came like Judgment Day. The Collins family arrived in sleek black cars, cameras flashing as if it were a red carpet event. Even their grief looked polished. Kinsley arrived alone, in a simple navy dress, and a coat she'd owned for 5 years. Inside the study, Orlando stood behind the mahogany desk with 2 sealed envelopes. The family took their seats, the air tight with anticipation. Julietta leaned toward Liam and whispered, "Watch her face when she gets nothing." Orlando broke the seal and began to read. It started as expected, divisions of assets, charitable endowments, personal items to various heirs. The usual applause of wealth distribution, but then his tone shifted. She were. Orlando said slowly, an addendum to this will handwritten notarized, and witnessed 1 week before Mr. Collins' passing. Whitney tilted her head. Addendum? Orlando continued. Mr. Collins instructed that his estate, businesses and foundations be placed under the administration of a single executor, chosen not by bloodline or seniority, but by virtue of demonstrated character. The room fell silent. He looked down at the second page. His exact words, the executor will be the one who served when others demanded, the one who listened when others spoke, the one who proved that humility and integrity outlive arrogance and show. He paused. Executor of everything, Orlando read, including their pride. The words seemed to hang in the air like a tolling bell. Julietta frowned, her voice cracking. And who's that supposed to be? Orlando looked up. Kinsley Collins. For a moment no one moved. Then laughter, sharp, brittle. desperate. You're joking, Liam said, standing. This is absurd. Whitney's eyes flashed. She can't even afford a new coat. You expect us to believe, the documents are certified, Orlando interrupted, lifting the notarized letter. Filed and verified under state law. Effective immediately. Kinsley sat frozen, every heartbeat loud in her chest. Around her the family's smiles fractured into disbelief. The same people who'd told her she didn't belong, were now bound to her authority. The irony was almost cruel, but perfectly poetic. And as Orlando slid the embossed folder toward her, Kinsley didn't reach for it immediately. She simply looked at the silver letters across the front. Executor of the Collins estate, her hands shook. Not with fear, but with realization. Everything had changed, and soon everyone would know it. The air inside the Collins mansion changed after that day. Laughter vanished, replaced by whispers that dripped like oil through hallways, once filled with champagne and self-importance. Even the staff moved differently. Quieter, careful, watching. Kinsley arrived early each morning now, escorted by the family's lawyer, Orlando Gray, whose calm voice seemed to echo Edgar's. Her name had been entered on every official document, executor of the Collins estate. It meant she had to approve every expenditure, every transfer, every dividend. And overnight, the woman they once mocked had become the one whose signature unlocked their lives. At first, the Barr cousins refused to believe it would last. Liam stormed into the study on Monday, sleeves rolled up, voice shaking with privilege. "You're not actually taking this seriously, are you?" he said. This was clearly a sentimental gesture. "You can't run holdings you don't understand." Kinsley didn't look up from the desk. "I don't need to run them," she said evenly. "I just need to protect them." "That's what an executor does." Whitney Barr laughed, though it sounded brittle. "Protect them. From who, us?" Kinsley met her gaze at last. "Exactly." The lawyer across the table didn't speak. He simply slid a copy of the trust document across to Liam. The line in bold print left no doubt. All disbursements, decisions and authorizations require approval of the appointed executor. The conversation died there, but humiliation had only begun to breathe. 3 weeks later, at the Collins Family Foundation board meeting, the reversal played out in public. The same boardroom that once excluded Kinsley now held every cousin, aunt, and in-law in polished form. Cameras clicked as they entered. The local paper always covered Collins' philanthropy. They expected to perform grief and leadership. Instead they met reality. Orlando opened the meeting by reading the late patriarch's note aloud. "May this board remember that charity without humility is vanity." Then he turned to Kinsley, seated at the head of the table. Her voice, though soft, carried. "Effective today, all discretionary spending will be frozen pending audit. The foundation's donations will be verified by recipient rather than surname." Julietta blinked. "You can't. Grandfather trusted us to manage." "I'm following his instructions," Kinsley said. "Integrity before inheritance." Murmurs rose. Cameras flashed again. Liam tried to retake the floor, but Orlando tapped his gavel once, calm, final. It was a moment made of silence and exposure. The women shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between reporters and the executor they once called pitiful. The word had turned into prophecy. Behind closed doors, the humiliation turned crueler. The Barr sisters began whisper campaigns, leaking claims that Kinsley forged her authority. They invited minor shareholders to dinner, feeding them gossip about the girl who got lucky with a dying man's sympathy. Kinsley heard every word. The staff she'd treated kindly for years, the same people the others ignored, brought her quiet updates. She kept notes, dates, and even small recordings. Every receipt went into a folder labeled contingency. Her silence became her shield, and her composure, their torment. The humiliation they planned for her began circling back, like a well-trained falcon. One morning, Julietta arrived at the office of Collins and Barr Holdings to find her corporate card declined. A memo awaited her executor authorization, required for all luxury expenses pending audit. Whitney's new sports car purchase stalled for the same reason. Liam's stock bonus froze in escrow. They gathered that afternoon in fury, storming into the main office. Kinsley was there, seated behind Edgar's oak desk. The sight alone insulted them. "You're abusing power," Liam shouted. Kinsley folded her hands. "No, I'm using responsibility. You're humiliating us in public." Celine snapped. Her voice softened, almost kind. No, Celine. I'm reminding you that money doesn't unmask people, it amplifies them. I just turned up the volume. The phrase stung deeper than anger. For the first time, none of them had a response. The echo of their own mockery filled the silence. Outside the mansion gates that night, reporters gathered. Rumors swirled about family audits, mismanaged donations, and internal rifts. The once unbreakable Collins image had cracks large enough for light to escape. Inside, Clissley sat alone in Edgar's leather chair, her reflection caught in the glass cabinet across the room. She wasn't smiling. Her victory didn't look like triumph, it looked like exhaustion wearing grace. On the desk before her lay the folder of proofs, receipts of misuse, donations rerouted to personal accounts, expenses labeled as charity dinners, that were nothing more than champagne parties. She hadn't leaked them, yet. She wanted repentance, not destruction. But they had other plans. The next morning, her cousin Liam called an emergency family meeting without her knowledge, planning to force her resignation through intimidation. They'd corner her with anger, make her falter, maybe even cry in front of staff. Instead, she walked into the dining hall already aware of every word they'd said. As she entered, conversation died mid-breath. She placed a slim folder on the table, calm as water. Before you begin, she said, you should know I already printed the audit summary. For each of you. She opened it, one by one. She slid pages across unauthorized withdrawals, falsified charity expenses, personal purchases under the family fund. Their own signatures stared back at them like ghosts. Julieta turned pale. Where did you firming commit? You never remembered to pay on time, Clissley said. People talk to those who treat them kindly. She leaned forward, voice low, deliberate. You taught me my place, now I'll remind you of yours. The silence afterward was pure theater, humiliation drawn slow. They signed the compliance documents in front of Orlando, and 2 witnesses. Their inheritance privileges suspended, their access restricted. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft against the windows, just as it had the night Edgar died. That night Kinsley returned to her Hartford apartment and removed the pearl earrings Edgar had given her years ago. She placed them in a glass dish beside her bed and sat for a long time, her reflection dim in the window. There were no tears of triumph, only the ache of release. The humiliation had come full circle, but revenge, she realized, didn't heal. Dignity did. She looked out at the rain and whispered, not to anyone alive, executor of everything, including their pride. The morning after the confrontation, the Collins mansion looked the same from the outside, grand, symmetrical, flawless. But inside, something had shifted. The rooms felt colder, the corridors longer, the family portraits more judgmental. The dynasty had cracked, and for the first time every cousin in it knew they were standing on borrowed pride. Kinsley arrived quietly at 8 a.m., as she always did. Her car, a modest gray sedan, looked misplaced among the imported machines parked along the drive. But she didn't flinch. The guards now greeted her first. Their tones softened from command to respect. The news of the humiliation spread fast. Across town, at the Maple Glen Country Club, whispers were everywhere. Did you hear? Edgar's invisible granddaughter's in charge now. Executor. Of everything apparently, including their pride. The sentence had become legend. Half shock, half admiration. Inside the estate office, Kinsley focused on numbers, not noise. She ordered forensic audits, redirected funds toward real charities, and required documentation for every personal expense billed to the foundation. For once, accountability existed inside a family that had lived off appearances for decades. But the entitled don't go quietly. By Thursday, Liam Barr and his sister Whitney had hired a private investigator to find a loophole, any proof that Edgar's mind had been compromised before his death. They met secretly in a glass-walled restaurant downtown, unaware that the waiter refilling their glasses was one of the Collins staff who admired Kinsley. She can't win this, Whitney hissed. She doesn't belong in that chair. She won't last, Liam replied. We'll drag her through court if we must. The waiter passed their table with a polite nod, memorizing every word. That evening Kinsley received a message from an unknown number. They're trying to void your authority. Be careful who you trust. She read it twice, folded her phone shut, and whispered, so it begins. The confrontation came faster than expected. Saturday afternoon, under the guise of a family reconciliation lunch, the bars invited her to the mansion's garden room. The table was set with silver and fine china, the scent of jasmine drifting in from the open windows. She arrived on time. Orlando, the family lawyer, was delayed in traffic, or so they said. Liam poured her tea, his smile tight. Whitney and Julietta flanked him like twin mirrors of malice. Kinsley, Whitney began sweetly, "We've decided it's best for the family, if you step down. Temporarily, of course. It's overwhelming work for someone without corporate experience." Kinsley stirred her tea. "Temporarily or permanently? Let's not label things," Liam said. "The press is watching. You could quietly sign a transfer. Orlando will word it properly." "And if I refuse?" Julietta leaned forward. "Then you'll wish you hadn't. There's no dignity in being dragged through scandal." The insult was sharp, but Kinsley didn't flinch. She set her spoon down carefully, then reached for her folder. The same soft folder she'd carried since the audits began. "I wondered," she said quietly, "how long it would take before you used threats instead of manners." She opened the folder, sliding 3 documents across the table. Bank statements. Misappropriated funds. Transfers to personal accounts, labeled charity operations. Each page bore their signatures. Whitney's color drained. "Where did you—" "From the foundation accountant," Kinsley said. "The one you tried to fire last year for questioning your expense reports." Liam's jaw tightened. "You wouldn't dare make this public." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I don't need to. The board already has copies. And so does the IRS." The room froze. The only sound was the slow ticking of the clock above the fireplace. Then she said the words that would follow them for years. "You taught me my place. Now I'll remind you of yours." No one spoke after that. No one moved. Even the breeze that drifted through the curtains seemed to pause, as though it too wanted to witness what grace looked like when it finally turned into justice. She stood, pushed the chair back gently, and walked out of the room without looking back. Behind her, porcelain cracked, Julietta's cup hitting the floor. Later that night, Kinsley sat alone in her Hartford apartment. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of restraint. On her desk lay Edgar's journal, the one he'd kept until his final week. She opened it to the last page and read his final entry. "If they ever laugh at her again, let the echo remind them who built their floor." Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled faintly. The humiliation she'd endured had turned into power. Quiet, earned, and dignified. Still, the victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt like closure. She removed her grandfather's pearl earrings and placed them beside the journal. The small dish shimmered under lamplight, 2 pearls glinting like twin moons. Her phone buzzed. A text from Orlando. Press caught wind of the compliance documents. "You did the right thing. They'll respect you now." She replied simply. "Respect isn't what I wanted. Integrity is." She turned off the phone and looked out at the city lights. Rain streaked the window again, tracing silver lines down the glass, the same way tears had once streaked her cheeks at the family table. This time, though, it wasn't pain. It was cleansing. The same mansion that once laughed at her name now stood under her command. The same cousins who had mocked her thrift now begged for her mercy. They had all learned the lesson written in ink and blood across their legacy, that money builds walls, but character decides who walks through them, and Kinsley Collins, quiet, humble, unseen Kinsley, had become the gatekeeper. By early autumn, the Collins estate had transformed. The mansion's echoing halls, once filled with laughter sharpened by cruelty, had fallen silent, replaced by the sound of work. Real work. Under Kinsley's direction, the Collins Family Foundation no longer sponsored lavish galas or vanity projects. The grand charity dinners that once cost $200,000 a night were replaced with direct scholarships for struggling students across Connecticut. The staff who had spent years serving quietly now found their wages raised and their names remembered. The world outside noticed. Articles in business columns called it the Collins Reformation. But the insiders knew better. This wasn't a reformation. It was a reckoning carried out with grace. And grace, when sharpened by betrayal, cuts deepest. Liam Barr's downfall came first. The audit revealed his unauthorized withdrawals from the investment trust, funds he'd used to back a failing tech startup. When the findings reached the family board, he resigned for health reasons. No one believed it. Whitney lost her seat at the foundation after her charity fashion line was exposed for using fake donations. She left Maple Glen soon after, muttering that the town had turned small-minded. Celine and Julieta quietly relocated to Boston, still wealthy, still bitter, but irrelevant. They thought the silence was her revenge. They were wrong. Her revenge wasn't in punishment, it was in permanence. Every document, every ledger, every signed correction bore her name, Executor of the Collins estate, a title that echoed long after their protests stopped. And through it all, she never gloated. That was the part they couldn't understand. Humiliation had taught her restraint. Power had taught her silence. She carried both like invisible armor. One late afternoon, as golden light poured through the estate windows, Orlando Gray, the lawyer, arrived unannounced. He carried a single folder and a faint smile. "It's done," he said. "The Federal Review cleared the accounts. The estate's clean, you did it." Kinsley looked up from her desk, eyes tired but clear. "No, we did it," she corrected. "He trusted both of us." Orlando hesitated, then placed the folder down gently. "There's one last thing. Edgar's personal letter. It was sealed until the board's reinstatement." He handed it to her. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and age. She waited until he left before opening it. "My dear Kinsley, I knew they would never see you until I made them need you. I regret that it took my absence for your worth to stand in daylight. You have been the quiet keeper of this family's soul. Let the estate teach them what I could not. Use your strength gently. Use it like light, not fire. With love, Edgar." The words blurred as she read them again and again, tears sliding soundlessly down her cheeks. 2 months later, the annual Legacy Luncheon returned. Its first under her direction. The long table remained, the chandeliers glowed, but the atmosphere was different. Gone were the hired photographers and the performative speeches. In their place, sat community leaders, scholarship recipients, and staff members who had once been invisible. When it was time for the toast, Orlando rose and gestured for her to stand. "Kinsley Collins," he said, "you've redefined what legacy means for this family. Would you say a few words?" The room waited, every face turned toward her, the same faces that once looked past her. She took a slow breath and raised her glass. "My grandfather believed legacy wasn't built by the loudest, but by the steady. I just tried to keep that promise. And to anyone here who's ever been overlooked, remember, silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's just the sound of building strength." Applause rippled around the table. Even the cousins, subdued and smaller in spirit, joined in. For the first time, the family gathering felt like a reunion instead of a coronation. As the applause faded, her gaze drifted to the portrait of Edgar on the far wall. The golden frame gleamed, his expression kind but firm. Beneath it hung a brass plaque engraved with the line that had rewritten their fate. "Executor of everything, including their pride." Later that night, after everyone had left, Kinsley stepped outside onto the balcony. The air smelled of rain again, faint and clean. She looked out across the lawns, the same view that once made her feel small. It didn't anymore. The mansion lights reflected faintly in the fountain below, a mirror of water that had once shown her invisibility. Now it shimmered with her reflection, strong, calm, and certain. She whispered softly, almost smiling, "Money unmasks people. But character decides who keeps the mask off." The wind caught her words, carrying them toward the distant trees. Inside, on the desk she had once been afraid to touch, lay Edgar's journal and her signed seal, the symbols of a promise fulfilled. No shouting, no scandals, no revenge in flames. Just a woman who turned mockery into mastery. "In the end, I didn't need to take their fortune. I became the proof that character was the real inheritance. Executor of everything, including their pride."